Within the shadows of history lie artifacts that embody humanity's darkest expressions of control. This project invites you, as a digital archaeologist, to explore the remnants of a forgotten dungeon, not as a player, but as a witness to systems of discipline, power, and silence. Until the end of the 18th century, iron and wooden cages were scattered throughout Europe's cities and suburbs for a simple purpose: to lock their victims inside and hang them. They would die of hunger and thirst, of storms and cold in winter, and of heat stroke and sunburn in summer. They are often tortured and mutilated beforehand, and the rotting bodies are often left in place until the bones fall apart. Before you stands the so-called Iron Maiden. Though widely recognized as a torture device, historical evidence suggests its function was largely symbolic. Most surviving examples are 19th century fabrications, created to dramatize the brutality of the past. Its presence here invites not horror, but inquiry. What do we choose to remember, and how much do we invent to reinforce it? This room contains items traditionally associated with physical coercion and psychological intimidation. A number of small kits, crooks, spikes, clamps, etc., are displayed on the table. On the right side of the table sits a skull crusher, a tool that has been widely known since the Middle Ages. This chair, called interrogation chair. The victim, usually naked, was strapped in as the spikes slowly pierced the flesh. Pain was intensified by rocking or striking the chair. Often made of iron, it could be heated with fire. Today, with electricity. This is a pillory, a punishment device used to publicly humiliate criminals. Victims were locked by the neck and hands, left standing for hours, exposed to ridicule and abuse. The head crusher was a brutal torture device used in 16th century Europe, primarily by the Inquisition during prolonged interrogations. The device featured a metal skull cap, a chin plate, and a screw mechanism that slowly compressed the victim's head. At first, the torturer used the screw to clamp the head tightly, sometimes striking the metal cap to send waves of pain. As pressure increased, the victim's teeth shattered and their jaw began to disintegrate. If continued, the eyes would burst and the brain could be forced out. Some designs even included receptacles for the eyeballs. Whether death occurred or not, the victim was often left with permanent damage to the brain, eyes, or jaw. These passages lead deeper into the dungeon. The pillory was used for public humiliation, and the prison wagon was used when the prisoners were paraded through the streets. Huge bellows were presumably used for burning at the stake or other cruel experiments. The archaeological record shows that some of the extreme instruments of torture were never actually used for execution, but rather as a show of authority. Beneath the spiral staircase, fragmented skeletal remains rest partially embedded in the dust, silent, unordered, and unresolved. Nearby, a series of rusted iron cages of varying dimensions suggest prolonged usage. While limited in narrative detail, these physical remnants provide the clearest spatial indication of the dungeon's historical function: containment, neglect, and corporeal erasure. In the deeper part of the dungeon stands the guillotine. It named after French physician Joseph Ignace Guillotin. The guillotine was introduced in 1789 as a more humane method of execution. However, similar devices existed earlier in England, Italy, and Scotland. France first used the guillotine in 1792, and it soon became the grim icon of the Revolution, claiming an estimated 15,000 to 25,000 lives, including King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. Later studies revealed that decapitation may not be painless, as consciousness can persist briefly. Despite criticism of its dehumanizing effect, the guillotine remained in use in France until the death penalty was abolished in 1981. The breaking of the wheel, which has been practiced in Europe for centuries, is considered to be an example of extreme torture. The wheel was not only a tool, but also a form of public intimidation. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, originated in ancient Greece as an instrument of torture, and later evolved into a method of public execution. It became especially widespread during the late Middle Ages, representing a brutal form of dismemberment. Throughout history, the wheel was used in various torturous ways. A common method in medieval Europe involved tying the condemned to the wheel. The executioner would smash their limbs and spine with a hammer before mounting the body on the wheel, which was then raised on a post. Victims were left to die slowly, often within hours, while crowds gathered to watch. The longer the agony, the greater the spectacle. Sometimes a final mercy was granted by slitting the victim's throat. Other variations existed. Some bound the person to the wheel and broke their bones with iron rods. Others nailed them in place and rolled the wheel down a slope. In the most horrific cases, the wheel was set upright like a cross and burned, killing the victim by fire. The device is linked to Saint Catherine of Alexandria, a 4th century scholar who was sentenced to death by the wheel for refusing to renounce Christianity. According to legend, The wheel shattered at her touch, and she was instead beheaded. The breaking wheel remained in use until 1841 in Prussia. By the 18th and 19th centuries, evolving ideas of justice and human rights brought an end to such punishments and imposed new limits on state power. What we are looking at here is a simple but chillingly constructed torture instrument, the Judas cradle, also known as the Judas chair. It consisted of a high tripod and a conical spire. The victim is stripped of his clothes and his body is slowly pressed against the tip of the cone, where a sharp metal cone is inserted into the sensitive parts of the victim. The executioner slowly presses the victim's body down by means of ropes, pulleys, or weights, a process that lasts for hours or more. Such punishment not only caused severe physical pain, but also great mental humiliation. In medieval society, these instruments of torture were not only symbols of power, but also instruments of fear and obedience. Today, as archaeologists, we try to explore the intricate relationship between power, faith, and human nature through these brutal relics. These objects no longer serve, they no longer harm, yet their forms remain, asking, what do we remember when we preserve instruments of violence? When cruelty is reconstructed digitally, do we reveal the past or restage it? What happens when historical cruelty is turned into modern play? In the presence of these cold instruments of torture and shadowy relics, we see not only the cruelty of history, but also the struggle of civilization. They remind us that power, fear, and punishment once dominated human society. Today, in the face of these witnesses to the past, we should think even more about how to protect our dignity and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. History is never just the past. It is always relevant to our future.